Hello, Peter. Katz. How are you today?
Well, Robyne, I think I am epitomizing the title of this podcast today, which is "In Time," and I'm very much in time. I'm having one of those days where everything spills into the other. I'm in Guadalajara, Mexico right now, and I'm doing keynotes, and I'm dealing with a bunch of personal stuff all at once, and I'm here with you, and I'm grateful to be here with you, and I'm creating a little bubble of calmness around this just to be here connected with you, and everything else that I'm doing in my life doesn't matter in this moment. I'm excited to just catch you in time and have this opportunity to connect. How are you?
Oh, Peter, that's so beautiful. And I appreciate that there's so many moving parts going on right now. And I appreciate that's the reality for so many people listening, that it's like there is never a good time. There is never like a calm time, it seems, lately. And what I love is just that you're essentially modeling for all of us how we have to just make the time, right? Like we have to choose where we get to show up and how we show up. And I know you don't have a lot of time right now, but the fact that we're still able to connect, to have a conversation, to be a support to one another and to the community, I'm super excited and appreciative. And as always, I just learn from you every single time we are able to connect. So thank you for showing that and sharing that.
Thanks, Robyne. I appreciate that. And yeah, I agree. I really appreciate you sort of relating that to the people that might be listening, that like we all have, it's such a common thing to answer the question how you're doing with busy, crazy, that's like, yeah. And I try to avoid that. Actually, I try to say lusciously full. That's the word that my dear friend Cora taught me, is to say lusciously full. Like, isn't it wonderful that there's all of these things in life? But just as a little inspiration for anybody out there that might be listening, I woke up this morning and I knew that I just had this like fully blocked, full day. And I remember, I think I said this in a past episode, my friend Ron said to me, like, on the days that you don't have time to meditate, you should meditate twice as long.
Yes.
And I didn't have time to meditate twice as long. But I was like, I've really been on this kick where I'm like, every day, no matter what, I want to wake up and exercise and meditate. And like, whether that's the full hour and a half of exercise and the luxurious long meditation, or whether it's what I did this morning, which was like, I ran down to the gym here and like 15 minutes, I like pumped some iron like a crazy guy. I did some jumps. I came upstairs. I meditated for 10 minutes and I'm proud of myself. And I feel like if you get 1 minute of each thing, you can be proud of yourself. Like, I'm just proud of the consistency and the commitment that even though there's a million things going on, I matter. And my body and my health and my mental health matters. And so I'm going to signal to myself, whether it's the full luxurious version of it or not, I'm going to signal to myself, hey, Peter, I'm thinking of you. You matter.
Oh, Peter, that is so amazing. And, I think so many of us fall into that trap, and we talk about it in psychology as kind of that all or nothing thinking, right? It's like, if I don't have the full 45 minutes, then I'm not going to do any physical activity. Or if I don't have that full 30 minutes or whatever that is in terms of to do that meditation, I won't do any. And I so often find that leans so deeply into this like need for perfectionism that I think so many of us are trying to like work our way through and explore, that it's kind of like it has to be perfect or I'm not going to do it at all, when the reality is that we're putting up these like false barriers and putting more pressure on ourselves versus like just doing what we can in the moment and being honest and real with ourselves. And I love the fact that it was like, I could do a little bit of physical activity for 15. I got a 10-minute meditation in, and that fact that you keep showing up for yourself, I think is just so important to like loosen the reins of perfection that I think so many of us are held back by, that idea that if we can't do it perfectly or 100%, then we're not going to do any, where the reality is like 50% some days, 75% some days, even 20% some days, and heck, even some days when you have even more time to do those things. When we average it out across a month or a year, I think that makes such substantive gains versus that kind of all or nothing.
I love that. I don't know if you had a vision for where we might go today, Rob. And if you do, then feel free to chime in with it. And I also have a suggestion, but I'm open to yours if you had an idea.
Peter, I'm excited to hear what your suggestion is. So yes, take us away.
Well, I kind of want to go down this rabbit hole, which is a rabbit hole of which you are one of the experts on. I think you even have trademarked the phrase, I can do hard things. I'm not sort of in the position in the moment to sort of give all the details, but not fully kind of my story to share. But I'm going through one of those hard things right now, and trying to balance out all the things that we try to balance out. Right, we have our lives, right, and especially it seems like increasingly our lives are so full that there isn't room for anything to derail that, right? It's like, okay, we're like pulling it off, but if somebody gets sick or we get sick or something happens or there's a snowstorm, like whatever it might be, all of a sudden the whole house of cards can fall. But what I'm interested in, and maybe you actually, I don't know if there's neuroscience around this or research around this or whatever it might be, but one of the things that I'm noticing in myself as I'm navigating these hard things is I actually feel almost like, Popeye eating the spinach or something, in the sense that I feel proud of myself. I feel actually stronger as a result of this. I feel like I can take on even bigger challenges. And I had a challenge in my work life the other day where I'm here in Guadalajara, and I had these two really big keynotes to give. Like one was for like 8,000 people virtually, and I had booked a special hotel, this really nice hotel up on the 10th floor. It was going to be nice and quiet. Like my Airbnb here can be a bit noisy, and I had gone to the hotel a week early, and I had done a speed test, and I brought all my gear, and it took me an hour to set it all up, and I got on with the client and their whole tech crew, and the internet wasn't adequate. So I had to take it all down and come back to my Airbnb here and be like, all right, I'm going to figure this out. And I was like, how am I going to create a more soundproof space? And so I took the duvet off the bed, and I took pictures off the wall, and I found nails, and I used a lemon squeezer. I hung this duvet on the ceiling, and I put a picture, and I grabbed a lamp, and I did this thing. And, the whole time that I was doing this, I think because I've been in this mode of really dealing with kind of some really big, hard things, I had this inner monologue of I am a badass mofo. I can do anything. And I did it, and I pulled it off. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts around this idea of the more we do hard things, there's a real benefit to that, and I'll throw one more curveball in for you to comment on, which is I heard Ron Fry, who created Appreciative Inquiry, and we can go down that rabbit hole, but he was talking about this idea that we really focus on post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic disorder, but he talked about this idea of post-traumatic growth, and that we don't sort of talk about that enough. So I've given you a lot, teed you up with a lot there. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on any of that.
There you go. Well, Peter, thank you for trusting me and us with part of that story of that wild adventure that you had to pull off for that keynote, but also too that in the midst of this professional work, you are navigating some really heavy emotional pieces personally, and just the fact that it gets to that point where it's how much can one heart handle, right? How much can one heart and one head and one body manage? And the reality is it's limitless. And what I often talk with persons about is that the more evidence we start to build that shows that we are capable of doing hard things, that we face challenges, even if the outcome isn't exactly what we had hoped for or desired, the fact that we had the courage to try, to step into it, to step in that ring, make that attempt, what happens is it starts to increase what we call in psychology our personal efficacy. Now, efficacy is the confidence in ourselves to be able to do the thing. And for persons who never get to kind of try to see what they're made of or what they're able to do, they actually have really low kind of capacity around efficacy, because they're like, oh, that's not me. The other people do that. That's not me. I don't do those things. But as we start to develop that confidence that is embedded within that efficacy, then we start to realize, like, yeah, I am somebody who can figure stuff out. And that is a powerful force when we can believe in our own skill sets and our talents and our gifts, and even just our ability to like have relationships, that we know the right people that we can talk to when I need to. Like, all of those things help to increase this overall capacity for our ability to do those hard things. And what's also something that I would share, given that you're going through so much, like right now in this particular season, you're in your stride. So when we're actually on our stride or hit our stride, it's like, okay, we can keep going. Like, even when we get walloped or knocked down again, it's like, no, you are in your stride. Like, you're in that zone of optimal development and performance, that you can do it. Now, my gentle invitation, because I deeply care about you, is that we can't stay there all the time. So we can't constantly being bombarded. And it's interesting because even the research talks about, for example, with members of the military through deployment, that there's actually a threshold that, yeah, they can be on alert, high performing, doing all the hard things, away from family. Like, they can do that for a period of time, but there is this threshold, and they actually identify it as 220 days a year or 400 days across 2 years, that after that mark, it starts to take a toll, Peter. So one of the things we think about is like, yeah, it feels good to be able to feel confident that we can do hard things, we can figure things out, and that's amazing to know you're competent. And we also want to recognize that it's a season, and we have to make sure that we have time for rest and replenishing, and that opportunity to not always be in like that firefighter mode, because the other parts of our personality and temperament, they need some attention too. But yeah, I totally get that. And I can share with you where that really comes up for me. And the family and I was recently traveling, and, whenever you're traveling with, internationally with a family of 5, like, there's going to always be like little kind of hiccups as we go. And one of the things, I laughed because as I got into the airport and there were a few little challenges, I all of a sudden just changed gears, and Hunter said, oh, Mom, airport is activated, because it's literally like, I just get really calm and I get really clear and I get really focused. And it's like, I can navigate them through some of the most complex airport systems in the world, because I know I can activate airplane mode, Robyne, right? And because, again, my experience with my work and traveling all around the world, especially traveling to some places that aren't the most optimal airport systems wise, like, that stuff doesn't rock me anymore. But again, when I was 16 traveling to some of those places by myself, yeah, I didn't have the skill sets where I definitely have them now. And what's so important to me is I was sharing with the children, because this is something I think as parents sometimes we forget, is like, okay, so I activated a skill set, which was airplane mode activated, right? Airplane mom activated. But instead of just going through it, I actually, for the first time, Peter, talked it out loud, because I want the kids to pick up those skill sets as well, right? So, as everything was going kind of hectic, I said, okay, everyone, take a deep breath. Focus on what you have control over right now, and what's the next right move that we're going to make. And as people are getting more upset, we get calmer, right? So I actually almost telecasted like a sports commentator, okay, now I'm going to go to the left because everybody else goes right. So I literally play by play what I was doing, because I want the kids to have those skills, especially at 18, 16, and 14. They're old enough that they can see what's going on, pick up those kind of little insights that I was dropping. So it was kind of cool for the first time to be able to share that, Peter, and do it with that telecasting so the kids knew. And the best part, to wrap up this super quick, on the way home, there was a few other little hiccups would happen with international travel. And then all of a sudden, Ava took charge. She was like, I am getting us through this. And Hunter looked at me and he's like, oh, Ava airport's activated. And so we all just then followed her and let her make the decisions. So yeah, to speak to what you're sharing, it's efficacy. It is so important that we lean into that and recognize that we can do hard things. And also, I think sharing it, right? Like letting other people see, what are we doing? Because this isn't a mystery, right? There's certain skill sets that you have picked up in your career and in your personal life that allowed you to use a duvet as a sound shield, to be able to like, think of all your camping experience that probably got activated, Peter, as you were stick handling those challenge. So using those skills, talking about them, they're all transferable. And the reality is all stressors are essentially the same with different faces, but our skill sets and our strategies that we can use to address those stressors, they're also the same too.
Oh, Robyne, this is what I mean, there's many things I love about you, but like, I love that I can just lob something at you and you just give this like beautiful, research-informed, story-infused keynote level answer, which is amazing. Yeah, there's just a few things I want to kind of harvest from what you said. I mean, first and foremost, I love that you took it towards like, you know, connecting with kids or with young people, because as you were describing it earlier, that this sort of finding our stride, and it feels like such a valuable skill set, you know, for us to teach the next generation. I don't have kids myself yet, but you know, I do a lot of mentoring work with teenagers, and you know, I try to interact with youth. It's you know, a great pleasure in my life, and I just love that you spoke to sort of how we transfer some of these things that we do over to you know, certainly to the young people, but even probably to others around us. It also kind of makes me think like I'm one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm creating this retreat in Costa Rica, and it's a big lift, and you know, we're talking about leadership, and we're talking about these different ways of making sure that the leaders both experience it and they can bring it back, right? And so, of course, I believe, I imagine you probably agree, that like the number one thing for us to do is to embody the thing that we're trying to teach, communicate, mentor, like to actually be that thing. But I love that you're also sort of sharing this strategy of communicating it. So it's not just like, oh, mom's amazing, but whoa, mom is amazing, and I can do that too. Like how empowering that is. So that was kind of one of my takeaways from what you said that I love, that you're one, embodying it, but two, you're sharing it. And the other thing that I love that you spoke to, which was sort of a concern in my mind, was like, okay, it's awesome that I'm kind of, you know, doing all these things and kicking butt and taking names and navigating all these challenges. But I was like, at a certain point, I might be in a manic state, you know, it could transfer over into this kind of unhealthy state where it's like, where's that line? And so I really just appreciate this idea of, it's funny, I actually connected when you said in your stride, I connected that to the idea of being in flow, right?
Yes.
And so when I associate flow, and I know like a basketball player can be in flow as they're going for a layup, but in my own sort of personal framework, I think of like, you know, writing a song or like being in that creative state or you know, but I also think about delivering a keynote or that kind of stuff. But I love this other version of flow, which is like being in stride, and I appreciate your gentle reminder that we need a counterweight or a counterbalance to that, and so we can appreciate that we're in stride, that we're in flow, that we're having these great moments. But just like me as an artist trying to write a song, in order to get into that flow state, I need to go live some life. I need to feel some sunshine on my face. I need to feel inspired, and that fuels me in that flow state. This idea of stride that you're describing is like, well, maybe part of the fuel for the stride is the nap or the meditation or the cuddling with the dog or those other things, and just to making sure that you know, personally, that I layer that in, and for, you know, our kind of overachievers or high achievers out there listening, or I see most people as high achieving. Just getting through life is a high achievement. You know, to find those counterweights.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm glad those resonated and landed with you, Peter. And, as you were sharing, what I was thinking about is just that recognition that we are able to push those limits. Like we're able to challenge ourselves again, as you're navigating, planning this really amazing leadership opportunity. Like it's so powerful for deep learning to not only hear concepts, but actually see concepts in practice, actually have people executing the things that we're talking about. So yeah, that's one of the most powerful ways to learn something, is to take it in as many parts of our senses as we possibly can, to hear it, to think about it, but to see it. So absolutely, that's how we cultivate that really, really deep learning. And the other thing that I just was, really inspired by your sharing about, just how we kind of manage all of these different things in this idea of flow state versus that idea of striding. My gentle invitation is also, as high performers, we have kind of this where we put value. And so often we put value on when we're in stride, or when we're in flow, or when we're being really productive. And so often when I talk to some high performers, I'll, ask them, oh, well, what did you do yesterday? And they're like, oh, I did nothing. And it's almost as if it's like a shame-filled sentence. I had sunlight and I have health in my body and privilege, and I did nothing yesterday. And it was almost like this, they share it begrudgingly. And my gentle awareness pause for all of us is that nothing is actually not nothing. That might be the rest that's part of the bigger picture of us being able to maintain high performance. And there's such this, where I see that a lot of times, sometimes folks get stuck, is the difference between rest and replenishing. Because there is a time when we do actually have to let our head and our heart and our body actually decompress. And then once we actually have gotten ourselves back into a state of balance, or kind of that equilibrium, then we can start thinking about, okay, well, then how do we replenish? And we do that with the sunshine on our face, with listening to things that inspire us, being around people who make us feel good. And then we start to fill that back up again. And then with that new knowledge, or those new insights, or those ideas that are always percolating in the back of our mind, right? Our best ideas, I don't think, ever happen in the moment. They happen when we step away, and maybe you're having in the shower, or you're out doing something, and all of a sudden that idea or that word, or that, that maybe that bridge in the song comes to you almost as if it's like a gift. That's because when we're resting, all those little neural pathways, they're still doing stuff. It's not as if it's like this disconnect from productivity. It's part of how we have this kind of more holistic approach to high performance and excellence.
I love that, Robyne. And I was reminded of, you and I do workshops together sometimes, and you guide people in making that quadrant where there's the low energy on one side, high energy on the other side, and then low reward and high reward. Yes. And I think about in my own life, sometimes when I'm trying to recover or do that thing, we sometimes do those low energy but also low reward things, and then I don't really feel as rejuvenated as I might be, whether that's sort of the doom scrolling, or the maybe letting Netflix advance to the next episode a few too many times, or whatever it is, versus that stuff that's low energy. So it's part of the rest and recovery category, but it's really high reward, right? Like I've described many times, walking to the corner and going to that coffee shop and getting the sun on my face. That's low energy, but it's really high reward. And so I love doing that quadrant and thinking about what are those things that for me live in the category beyond work, but when I do them, they really give me such a net positive result.
Yeah. And Peter, I love that. And I'll share with you some of the traps, right? I'll share with you some of the traps in that, because I find this is one of the areas that people always ask me about. So what you're describing, scrolling is a really easy one, or again, watching that passive consumption of media, right? We know that's low effort. It does give us a bit of a break from the higher thinking, the different parts of our brains being activated. So sometimes we actually need to kind of move away from all of the responsibilities that we have to do. So that's there's no shame in those behaviors. They actually serve a purpose. But the kind of the marker that we sometimes use is this idea between like adaptive and maladaptive. So it's like, yeah, can you can you spend 10 minutes doom scrolling or just kind of mucking about on the internet, just as a way to kind of just like shake off and use the different part of your brain than the part that's doing all that planning and critical thinking and problem solving. But the idea is, okay, well, like after 10 minutes, usually at that point, it doesn't actually help us feel any better, right? Like then that starts to kind of get into maladaptive, where it's like, we feel like some people even report, feel like they can't even put it down, right? Like they just feel like this, almost like this, pull to it, because our brain is just literally going into this passive mode. So there's that kind of adaptive and that maladaptive. And the other piece I want to share with you, this is another trap that I see people fall into often. And this is a tricky one to talk about. So I'll give you the heads up that this kind of causes a bit of discomfort sometimes. It's this idea, and it's actually a thought process that's called self-entitlement, where it's like, hey, you know what? I worked so hard all week. I'm entitled to watch 16 hours of Netflix on Saturday, right? I work so hard. I'm entitled to eat, all of these things that go beyond comfort and satiation, right? It's this idea that it's because my life is so difficult and I do all the right things, then I'm entitled or I'm allowed to do all this other stuff. And again, my gentle invitation for that is to recognize that often it's actually harmful. Right? It's at that point where for a little bit, but when we go past that and we kind of feel entitled to do this. And it's really interesting because the groups that we see this with high levels of prevalence actually, interestingly, is in our medical community, where it's persons, in our frontline persons where they've been taking care of sick people and people who are unwell. And at the end of the day, they find that, they can only fall asleep if they have a bottle of wine, right? So just understanding that entitlement piece and where it fits. And again, there's no shame in any of that. It's just realizing that we are the person who gets to choose, right? We get to decide how long. And for some of us who struggle with it, having enforced boundaries is really helpful. So for example, setting an alarm that you'll scroll for 15 minutes. And when the alarm goes off, you just stand up, right? Right. Using things to actually make those behaviors more possible to walk away from, something to think about.
Or you put the chips in a bowl versus taking the whole bag.
Exactly.
I will have chips, but I will have this many chips. For whatever reason, I had this image, and this is a bit of a trap that we fall in, with our relationship with exercise and food.
Yes.
I went for a run, and therefore I get to eat 3 pizzas, right? And
yes.
So that you can go down a rabbit hole. I remember participating in a 5K run, and it's awesome to do a 5K run, and it's a modest distance, right? It's awesome, and for some but I remember at the end of the run, they were handing people liters of chocolate milk and these giant muffins, and there was cheeseburgers, and everybody's and I was like, God. And it was literally a fundraiser for cancer or the Heart Association. I was like, what is happening here?
Yes.
We should not, we're sort of contradicting ourselves. And
yes.
But, you have that feeling of entitlement afterwards, which again, I'm not trying to criticize that achievement, but I really appreciate the distinction that you're wrapping in, or the potential trap that you're describing.
Yeah.
Certainly with healthcare, I appreciate that one too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and again, that it's self-entitlement. It's we earn our rewards for sure. But my gentle invitation and when I'm working with persons is, again, things just always be just a little bit gentle when we think about food as rewards, right? Because that obviously can lead into some of that cyclical behavior. But I totally hear what you're saying, where it's we want to reward, we want to celebrate, we want to recognize that. But there's lots of different ways in which we can create time and recognition for ourselves when we do the good things. The other thing that makes me think about too is, if we notice that we're doing some self-entitled behavior, instead of trying to, this is a line I use often in my research and my work, it's we can't hate ourselves healthy, right? We can't outthink stress. We cannot hate ourselves healthy. So instead, if anyone's listening being oh shoot, I do self-entitlement, man, I'm going to whip myself into shape, my gentle invitation is meet it with such big open arms of compassion, to be like, what we're really looking for is the acknowledgement that we are working so hard, that we keep showing up even in the difficult times, even in the hard seasons. So instead of like feeling like we have to like punish that behavior, my gentle invitation is to really, really embrace it with compassion and maybe a little bit of mercy and some grace, and just recognize like, yeah, I understand why I'm having these thoughts or these cravings, or like I'm doing these behaviors, because at the end of the day, we just want to be seen and recognized and acknowledged for the good work that we're trying to do. To be a functional adult right now is an enormous task. It is so much easier to be dysregulated and mean and cold and shut down than it is to be a person who is present and open-hearted right now. So again, that little bit of encouragement to meet those parts of that behavior with compassion instead of punishment.
I have one more word that or adjective or whatever that came to mind as you were describing that, which is also humor. Like sometimes it's like you look at yourself and the same stimulus that you might be like disgusted with yourself, or like you could almost be funny. It's like, oh my gosh, like look at what I'm doing, or like look at this ridiculous situation that I'm in. Like just almost laughing at how ridiculous it is, I think it was another word that came to mind there.
I love that. Absolutely. Humor is definitely a gift, right? It's such a gift to be able to like put things in perspective quite quickly. I'm
mindful of our time here, Robyne. We are finding our slice, and we're at our 30-minute mark. And in 3 minutes, I fully have to go. I'm curious. Do we have time to squeeze in a little question, or what do you think?
I think we're going to honor time and your time and the packedness of the fullness of your time. And I think we can bring this to a close. But Peter, as always, thank you for sharing your time with me and to our community. This is always a treat and something I look forward to. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you too, Robyne. Thank you to all of you listening. And I'm so grateful for this time with you, Robyne, and thank you for allowing me to now go pee in between my sessions. So,
there you go. Go be human. Go be human.
All right. I'll save my great question for you for next time. I was excited to ask you, but I'll
Sounds
ask you
good.
next time.
Sounds good. Take good care.